So before we close out our thinking on this idea of unitized curtain wall systems in M2, I want you to give some thought about where you can go with this. You maybe experimented with that a little bit in your individual project. But here's a couple of examples of could be conceived as unitized. They may or may not be, but could easily be unitized. So this idea of these really thick frames is really quite popular now, of these massing elements on buildings. We're getting away from the idea of an all-glass kind of structure, and our clients are looking for these kind of more interesting surfaces, so to speak. And so we have a really heavy kind of facade massed element overlaying our glass or opening areas, and that can be played out at different levels of modulation. Obviously now we have a much thinner and I think a more beautiful facade in this other one. These are all hyperlinked. And you'll notice in the background we also have another play with facades, and that's the idea of modulating the grid spacing, which we have total control over. And so there's a lot of places that you can intellectually and visually and artistically go with your design of facades. And you can also use this technique on elements that you either are going to unitize or may not even desire to unitize. This is just this is something you wouldn't think about as being unitized in a brick cast concrete wall system going into place. All kinds of advantages to doing this. All the work could happen in a factory in warm conditions, even during the winter. It would enclose the building very quickly. But there's a modeling technique, there's a design technique. You don't even have to necessarily envision this as being a modular construction. You can use the idea of constructing the base unit and then playing it out on a facade just to experiment with facades variations that you might be interested in. So it can be conceived in a modular fashion to allow design development, and then on site be conventionally built, non-modular or non-unitized. I think this was the that one hotel project that we looked at before. These are some detailed drawings of it, and I think this brings up another kind of an interesting way of thinking about unitizing and modularizing our construction. And we could think of the window system as being a grid system, and the metal panels that are break formed, that have this nice look of massing to them, as being another grid system laying over the other one. So we could have this feeling of layering, but also intellectually, as far as fabricating, that we could have two grid systems totally linked with each other as far as fit up, but would allow assembly and construction to occur independently of each other, and also give the flexibility of what is unitized and what is field applied. This is a nice project, I think, because of all the things that are going on. I just wanted to punch up just to stimulate your thinking on this idea of what these kind of construction systems might have for potential. Here we have I think a natural wood fin, baguettes under glass, wooden, it looks like wooden shading systems for solar gain control. So there's a whole lot going on in this modular system, and I think the effect is really quite beautiful. Another tack on that idea of articulation of components. This is a Salesforce tower in California, a very large building. But here we have these shading devices. They're baguettes now, but they're really actually, or they would be replacing what we might conceive as baguettes, but now they're much deeper elements, probably creating much more effective shading systems. And we get a real sense of thickening of the facade. The facade has a depth to it, and that allows it to cast shadows, create all kinds of really beautiful lighting effects on the and depth to the facade. So it's something to keep in mind and consider. You can move, as we have done, you can mass individual unitized elements, or you can create significant kind of massed elements on the building to really beautiful effects. This is a nice example of that idea of modulating the facade for a beautiful visual effect. And this could be just in the placement of This may be a modification. I'm not exactly sure what's going on in all of the details here, but it could be a modification of module width in certain areas, or it could be just modules that interconnect to each other to create these kind of visual interest. I put this one in because when we talk about going around curves and other curved surfaces, in some cases we have actually curved elements and probably mixed with flat elements. But there are places where, if we're not careful with our detailing with curves, they can look a little bit on the, I guess, a cruder side. And this may not be objectionable to you or not, but I show you this project where the baguettes are actually curving, a very nice visual effect from a distance. And this up-close view, and you can see the faceting that happens because they're straight baguettes with a certain unit width. And that creates this kind of a jagged effect. So just be aware of that and think about that when you're kind of proposing curved surfaces. If you can't, if this becomes undesirable and it's difficult to curve the material, you may find you've created a difficult detail to actually construct. This looks like there's some glass louvers and a much more visually complex wafer facade. I'm just showing these to just keep you stimulated. Here's a one I picked up. I don't know if this one's hyperlinked. I don't believe it is. And this is the last slide. But you know, that this idea of thickness to it. Wonder how it, you know, I would be interested in your opinions about how it plays off of classical architecture. I actually think it works really quite well together. In this image, this twisted member here is, I think, quite unique. So there's all kinds of ideas, and I think we can, even if this wasn't built as a unitized concept, we can really see this idea of the modularization of it, and we can understand how we could be developing advancements on this kind of an idea. So anyway, I hope that's useful, and I hope you'll continue to think about this idea of unitizing and modularizing facades for your advantage whenever it's a possibility in a project.